He has starred in 60 movies, emceed the Oscars 16 times, yet never won one for his acting.
I really had a sneaky idea that they were going to give me an Oscar tonight because I saw one of them with a surprised look here.
He's played scores of bumbling, cowardly, fast talkers.
I slipped.
Yet he's the hero who brought laughter and cheer to the troops on the battlegrounds of 5 wars. He has cured many of the country's sacred cows.
The big news this month were the elections. There was white smoke over the Vatican and a black cloud over the National Republican headquarters.
Yet he is one of America's best-loved comedians. He's written and published 12 books, holds 56 honorary doctorates, but he never finished high school. He has entertained and been honored by 11 presidents of the United States, been courted by royalty, and dined with international leaders. And for most of the 20th century, he's spoken for and to the heart of the common man. The Bob Hope story really began in Wales in the winter of 1890. It was there the 21-year-old stonemason, Harry Hope, persuaded Avis Towns to give up a promising career as a concert singer and marry him. They lived a comfortable life until Harry made a few bad investments at the track. They lost everything. They were forced to move to Eltham, a working-class suburb of London. It was there on May 29th, 1903, that Harry and Avis welcomed their 5th son into the world. His name was Leslie Towns Hope. The following year, with another child on the way and few job prospects, Harry joined his brother Frank in Cleveland, where he had heard work was more plentiful. The young stonemason lived with his brother, worked hard, and saved his money to buy passage for Avis and his 6 boys. Finally, in 1906, Les and his brothers boarded the ship, traveling steerage class to America. For 3-year-old Les, the arrival at Ellis Island was a frightening experience.
I ran all over the place. I wouldn't let them vaccinate me. I didn't want them to put that needle. I didn't want that. And I ran all over the place. They finally got to me.
After the chaos of clearing immigration, Avis and her 6 boys boarded the train for Cleveland. There was a joyous reunion, and Harry took his family home to live with Uncle Frank and Aunt Alice. Though Frank Hope's home was a good size, it still wasn't big enough to accommodate 2 extra adults and 6 exuberant boys. They all tried to make the best of it, but Harry and his sons made a pact. They vowed to get a house of their own and a piano for Avis. The older boys got jobs and saved, but unfortunately for Harry, work was often hard to come by. After a year and a half, the family finally moved into their own home.
Here it was an English family moved into an Italian neighborhood, which was an event in itself. If you ever got in a fight with one of them, those Italian kids had to fight all 6 brothers. The word got around among the Italians, don't fool with those Hopes because you can't win.
It was a large house, so Avis took in boarders to help make ends meet. Life was hard, and sometimes there wasn't enough food to go around. But somehow, Harry and his sons managed to buy Avis a piano. That piano was the joy of her life, and the Hope family spent many happy hours around it. All the Hopes loved to sing. Despite the constant worry about money, Avis would always do something special for each boy. One of her great pleasures was to take young Les to the vaudeville houses and the picture shows. Charlie Chaplin was their favorite.
I loved Chaplin, and I used to do an imitation of Charlie Chaplin. All the firemen used to sit outside on chairs, you know, in the good weather. And I'd go around swinging like this, and they'd all applaud me.
Les was always looking for a way to make a buck. He was a very observant boy who used his wits to create opportunities for himself and his pals. Luna Park and Euclid Beach were popular venues for company picnics during the summer. Les was particularly interested in the foot races, which awarded cash prizes.
My partner and I, Whitey Jennings, we could beat anybody. Oh, it was pretty bad the way we got. When it was on your mark, get set, we were gone on get set. See? And they never brought you back for a rerun because there was a picnic and everybody's happy, you know, and they got taffy in their hair and everything.
School never really appealed to Les Hope. He found the lessons slow, and he was constantly teased and called hopeless. He never graduated from high school, but he held a series of odd jobs. Between jobs, he was often spotted at the Alhambra Pool Hall.
Bob, he was a great pool player, and he used to make a few nickels there, you know. Then he and Whitey Jennings, they were in there every day and playing pool.
Les also spent a fair amount of time hanging out at the East Cleveland YMCA. His pal Whitey Jennings signed up for the Ohio State Amateurs. So, Les decided to sign up too, under the name of Packy East.
I won my first fight because the guy I fought, every time I hit him, he looked at his corner for advice. And I slugged him again. And the next fight I fought the champion of the 135 division, Happy Walsh. And they called him Happy Walsh because when you hit him, he smiled at you. And I swung a right hand, and that's all I remember.
Les tried his hand at many things, but finally, at the urging of his friend Charlie Cooley, he took up dancing. He was a natural, and eventually became an instructor. One of his pupils was a pretty young girl, Mildred Rosequist. They became sweethearts, and he talked her into working on a vaudeville act with him. For the first time, Les Hope knew what he wanted to do.
I went to her mother and I said, could I take Mildred on the road? And her mother said, I got to see the act. And so she came out to see the act, and she said, my daughter's not going on the road in that act.
After Mildred, Hope had a series of male partners, Durbin and Hope, Hope and Byrne. They worked primarily as dancers, throwing in comedy wherever they could. They toured small cities around the East, doing 5 to 6 shows a day for $100 a week. The life of a vaudeville gypsy was demanding, but Hope loved it. They appeared on the bill with some wild acts, including Siamese twins, Daisy and Violet Hilton. On a visit home, he took his mom to the theater to see the funny and dapper Frank Fay, one of his idols.
And she says to him, she says, le cœur te monte pas la télévision. And he looks at her, of course, he has nothing else to do. And
in the middle of his act, he's killing the audience. She looked at me in a loud voice to be heard 12 rows each side. She said, he's not half as good as you. And I ducked down, and people looked and said, who the hell is talking, you know? But that was my dear mother trying to give me a little guts.
In 1927, Hope and Byrne did their first Broadway show, Sidewalks of New York. The show was a big hit, but the producers had enough dancing in the show and let the fellas go. Once more, they were out on the street. But this time they had a Broadway show to their credit. They'd learned an important lesson. Emphasize comedy, minimize dancing. A few months later in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, Les was asked to announce the billboard for the next week.
Next show is going to be Marshall Walker and his Whiz Bang Review. He's a Scotchman. He got married in the backyard so the chickens could get the rice. That got a pretty damn good laugh, because Scotch jokes were very big in those days. And I kept building on this till about 3 days. I was out there getting big laughs for about 5 minutes.
Hope scored with the audience, and the manager suggested he try it solo. About this time, Les decided that he should change his name. He chose Bob. It sounded chummier. With his new name, Bob Hope, he played a theater in Indiana, but noticed he was billed as Ben Hope in the ads. He quickly confronted the manager.
I said, well, what's this thing, Ben Hope? He said, that's you? I said, yeah. Well, what's your name? I said, Bob Hope. He said, who knows?
In 1928, Bob headed for Chicago full of expectations. What he found were a lot of doors closing in his face. Down on his luck, Bob was ready to quit.
This friend of mine, Charlie Cooley, came along. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm starving. He said, come on upstairs. Took me upstairs. I met Charlie Hogan that booked all the picture theaters on there. He booked me at the Stratford Theater for 3 days. I stayed there 6 months.
It was at the Stratford that he began to develop the Bob Hope style. Rapid-fire jokes, impeccable timing, daring the audience to keep up with him.
Feel awful today. I had a nasty dream last night. All night long I dreamt I was eating lifesavers. This morning when I woke up, all the buttons of my pajamas were gone.
He was signed for the Orpheum circuit. Bob was in the big time.
The big time was playing, the big theaters where they did 2 shows a day only. It was a circuit that we worked for 38 weeks with the same show, and travel was like a road show.
He was touring when he met the Diamond Brothers, who got him hooked on golf. A few weeks later, he went to Hollywood for his first screen test.
And I said, "Could I see it?" And they showed me the test. And my nose came on the screen before I did, and it left after I left. And I went, "Oh, that's all."
Despite his disappointing start in pictures, Bob was a big-time vaudeville headliner. He became totally absorbed in the task of getting new jokes. He scoured joke books and worked hard to keep his act fresh. When this wasn't enough, he hired his first writer, Al Boasberg. In 1929, Bob Hope returned in triumph to Cleveland. His whole family went to opening night. Avis was thrilled that her son was starring in a show at a theater built on the Sandlot, where he used to play as a boy. While Bob was in Cleveland, he learned from his brother Fred that their mom had cancer. Bob and his older brothers bought their parents a new home. The only thing Bob and Fred let them bring from their old house was Avis's piano. It was a bittersweet time for Bob. He was upset by his mother's illness, but he was also on the verge of great professional success. In the early 30s, most of the country was struggling through the Depression. President Herbert Hoover promised the voters that prosperity was just around the corner. Bob Hope found work making people laugh, despite the hard times.
And a lady walked up to me and said, "Could you tell me where I could find the restroom?" I said, "It's just around the corner." She says, "Don't give me that Hoover talk. I gotta go."
Bob was by now a big success in vaudeville. So it was only a matter of time until Broadway beckoned. The 30s were exciting times on the Great White Way, and Bob was eager to be a part of the Broadway scene. Hope appeared in Ballyhoo of 1932, a review based on a popular magazine of the time. On opening night, the lights accidentally went out. Lee Schubert, the producer, called on Bob to calm the audience. Bob got them laughing. Schubert was impressed, and he changed the rundown so that Bob now became the opening act, this time with the lights on. While in rehearsal for Ballyhoo, Hope had his first brush with television, which in the early 30s was considered a novelty. He was part of a celebrity gala on CBS station W2XAB. During the Ballyhoo run, Bob made several appearances on Rudy Valley's Flashman radio show, an extraordinarily popular hour that had a devoted national audience of 24 million.
Across the red, a little kiss each morning.
Yeah, that was a Flashman. I used to get the money and run out in the corner and count it like I was stealing it. I didn't believe you could get that kind of money in radio, you know. And with my act, I think I was mostly a theft. Wait, I have a joke. There's a fellow walks into a psychiatrist's office, has a rash or a bacon over each ear, and he takes off his hat, and he has 3 eggs in the top of his head. And the psychiatrist takes a look and says, "What can I do for you?" And the fellow says, "I'd like to see you about my brother." That's it.
His appearances were well received. He was also pleased that his family back in Cleveland could listen in. In fact, Mom had the whole neighborhood tuned in to the Rudy Valley show. After Ballyhoo closed, Bob was booked into the Capitol Theater in New York for 2 weeks. This was the first time his name was paired with Bing Crosby on a theater marquee. They were doing 5 shows a day and had a lot of free time, so they worked on bits and golf. Bing was a more serious fellow, and Bob's zany, spontaneous humor sparked something in him. They delighted in breaking each other up, and the two developed a friendship and some routines they used throughout their lives. But Bob couldn't completely enjoy his success. He learned from his brother Fred that Mom's cancer was incurable. So he had a telephone installed next to her bed so that they could talk every day. She loved hearing about his adventures in show business, but seldom spoke about herself. Bob continued to do personal appearances at night, leaving time to make a couple of short films, or two-reelers, at the Astoria Studios in New York during the day.
What are the weekly rates for this, Bob?
Oh, I don't know. Nobody ever stayed here a week.
Well, how are the other rooms?
Oh, you mean the 50-cent rooms? Oh, they'll never do. No. This is one of the better rooms.
Well, what do you pay for this?
Oh, this is 75 cents. This has a rat trap. Bring your own cheese. Yeah.
He made the long drive from New York to Cleveland as often as he could to visit his mother. It broke his heart to see his beautiful mom wasting away. He tried out new material on her, hoping to make her laugh. His father, who was now retired, stayed home to look after Avis. Bob and his brothers, now successful businessmen, sent money home to help with the bills. Back in New York, Bob was cast for the leading role in the musical Roberta. One night, his co-star George Murphy took him out on the town.
I was singing at the Vogue Club in New York, a very charming supper club. One evening, George Murphy, an old friend of mine, came in to see the show, and with him was this young man.
And she walked out singing Paper Moon, but there was something different about her.
We found that we had a lot in common. We loved dogs and loved golf. It was really instant love between the two of us. I think Bob felt the same way. I went home and told my mother, I said, I think I've met my husband. And of course, she was in complete shock. She said, who is he? And I said, he's a chorus boy in Roberta. Of course, Mother was aghast. I went to the matinee, the first matinee, and when I saw him perform, this really fantastic man, I was too embarrassed to go backstage. I was supposed to go backstage to say hello to him after, but I really had to, I didn't want to, because what was I going to say to him? I thought I was the star, and I was being sweet about a chorus boy.
But I kept on her, and finally I gave in.
Knowing they would soon be separated by family and career obligations, Bob took a memento to keep Dolores close.
There was a tiny ring that my dear father had given me on my 13th birthday that I treasured.
And I put it on, and I said, is that all right? She said, yeah.
Anyone who looks at a picture of him now, that little ring is still on his pinky. That never came off.
Despite the distance between them and the objections of Dolores' mother, Bob proposed, and Dolores accepted. Their marriage plans, however, were delayed by the tragic death of Bob's mom. Devastated, Bob returned to Cleveland for the funeral. His mother had always been there for him, and now she was gone. He found comfort in the company of his brothers and in his love for Dolores. Shortly after the funeral, he returned to New York, and he and Dolores were married. He resumed his Broadway career, as well as taking his act on the road, enjoying it more than ever, with Dolores singing by his side.
'Cause you're all I love, my angel, my heaven above, complete. You are so simple and sweet.
While Hope was starring in his latest Broadway show, Say When, his new high-powered agent, Louis Schur, negotiated Hope's first regular radio job as MC of the Bromo Seltzer program.
Presented by Bromo Seltzer. We also have a surprise for you. A new master of ceremony, Bob Hope. Very nice, Al. This is the voice of inexperience, Bob Hope, conducting the Bromo Seltzer Intimate Review. Everyone these days is interested in what's doing...
Doc Schur also made a deal with Vitaphone Shorts in New York for Bob to make several two-reelers. This time he was a smash, and his style translated beautifully to film. These shorts were a hit.
Look, I am Robert, the new hairdresser. I'm a friend of Michael Cummings.
Are you sure you're not a maniac? What business have you taking my picture?
Why, madam, taking pictures is my business.
Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Hope was signed by the Schuberts for the comedy lead in Ziegfeld Follies with the great Fanny Brice, Ken Murray, Josephine Baker, and Eve Arden. Vincent Minnelli did the sets, and George Balanchine the choreography. It was an elegant and popular show, and Fred de Cordova was the stage manager.
It was in that Follies that he sang I Can't Get Started With You, to Eve Arden.
I've flown around the world in a plane. I've settled revolution in Spain. The North Pole I have charted, but I can't get started with you.
Even though he was scoring with sold-out audiences and lots of laughs, Bob's greatest success was yet to come. Red Hot and Blue opened at the Alvin Theater on October 29, 1936. Hope co-starred with Ethel Merman and Jimmy Durante. The show was a smash.
Do, so, mi, do, la, si.
Take it away.
The night is long, the skies are clear, and if you want to go walking, dear, it's delightful, it's delicious, it's lovely.
This is rare footage of Bob in Red Hot and Blue, taken by a fan from a seat in the audience.
Delightful, it's delicious, it's lovely.
You can tell at a glance what a swell night this is for romance.
You can hear dear Mother Nature murmuring low. Let yourself go.
So please be sweet, my chickadee. And when I kiss you, just say to me, it's delightful.
It's delicious.
It's delectable.
It's delirious.
It's dilemma.
It's the limit.
It's deluxe. It's
lovely.
During the run of Red Hot and Blue, as Bob came off stage one night, he received news of his father's death. Though his father had been in failing health, the news was a terrible blow. Once again, he returned to Cleveland, only this time, Dolores was by his side. Despite his personal sadness, Hope's radio career was thriving. First, the Atlantic Family Show, followed by a stint as MC of The Woodbury Show. In June of 1937, Bob signed a one-picture deal with Paramount for his first feature, and NBC agreed to switch The Woodbury Show to the West Coast. He and Dolores were Hollywood-bound, but neither felt the move was anything but temporary. On September 9th, 1937, Bob and Dolores stepped off the Super Chief in Pasadena, California. Their arrival went unnoticed, and they were generally overlooked or snubbed. After all, a Broadway star carried little weight in Hollywood.
What is your name? Bob Hope.
Bob even had to steal an audience for his radio show from an old vaudeville pal, Edgar Bergen.
Well, we don't have an audience for you, but the Bergen show is on right ahead of you, and we'll take his audience and whip them right in the studio. We had it planted so they couldn't get away. And I was standing on the stage saying, come in, sit down, sit down. We go on the air in just a few minutes. Come in, sit. I'm Bob Hope. I'll explain the whole thing to you later.
Not only was Bob an unknown, but he also had to contend with a movie studio that wanted to change his appearance.
Can you imagine if anybody had talked him into having a nose job done? His whole personality and everything about him was this great ski nose.
Bob was given the music and lyrics to Thanks for the Memory from the movie he was about to film, the big broadcast of 1938. Before filming began, Bob got valuable acting advice from director Mitch Lyson.
He said, in pictures, your eyes are the whole thing. You have to visualize and tell the story with your eyes. And I believed him.
The entertainment, yes. You go right down the hall, and you... $50,000.
Oh. And the fellow says, cut. He says, can I talk to you about? He says, you know what we were talking about yesterday? I said, forget it.
Hope was in the big leagues now, co-starring with W.C. Fields, Shirley Ross, and Dorothy Lamour.
He was not the big star then that he is today. And I remember that Adolph Zucker saw the dailies, and he fell in love with Bob Hope. Everybody on the lot was talking about our new star, Bob Hope.
I came out of the hotel one day, and Ed Sullivan was coming in. And Ed said, how are you doing? I said, oh, I can't wait to get out of this town. He said, you better quiet down and get yourself set, because you're going to be here for a long time. I said, why? He had just come from seeing the rushes of Bob and Shirley Ross singing Thanks for the Memory.
He hired a publicist and an agent, not with a contract, but with a handshake.
With Hope, you never needed a contract. He say he'd do it, fine. It was hard sometimes to get him to say yes. But when he said yes, that was it. His word was better than a contract.
Off the set, Bob renewed an old friendship with his buddy from the Capitol Theater, Bing Crosby. Paramount saw an opportunity to promote the new rising star by playing up the rivalry between Hope and Crosby. The big broadcast of 1938 premiered, and the hit of the picture was the duet, Thanks for the Memory.
Thanks for the memory of rainy afternoons, swingy Harlem tunes, motor trips and burning lips and burning toast and prunes. How lovely it was.
Hope was personally singled out by the powerful Hollywood press, including Ed Sullivan and Luella Parsons, who wrote in her column, Bob Hope, scoring both on radio and in the big broadcast, has been given a star dressing room at Paramount. Bob's schedule was overwhelming. His brother Jack answered the call to act as his right-hand man, an invaluable asset for over 30 years. Bob continued his weekly radio show, landing a 6-year contract with Pepsodent for top money, and most importantly, creative control.
The Pepsodent Show, starring Bob Hope. We bid you all hello, and welcome to our show. May we present for Pepsodent a guy you want to know.
Ah, thank you so much.
The rigors of writing a weekly show proved too much for one writer.
He was so appreciative of what writing meant to his career and what writers meant to him, and I think among his best friends were writers who worked with him and for him. And unlike many comics, he did not pretend to write it all himself, although Bob is very capable of coming up with his own very funny lines.
Jerry Colonna was a regular on the show.
We'd like a few words on your experience as a world traveler. That Pacific tour wasn't your first big trip, was it, Colonna?
Oh, no, I've been to England, Russia, Australia, Africa, and Alaska.
You've been to England, Russia, Australia, Africa, and Alaska?
Yes. I'll get one of your checks cashed yet.
Each writer would give him, say, 100 jokes. Hope would read the jokes. We would be in the room. If he liked the joke, he would tick it off. And go through everybody's material doing that. Then he would go to page 1 again. If the joke he ticked he still liked, he'd put a mark through it, making it an X. And then he started it again. And then, if he really liked the joke, he would circle the check and the cross. Until finally he got perhaps, 40 jokes that he was willing to go on the air with.
Using his vaudeville technique and timing, Bob delivered his monologue at top speed, acquiring the name Rapid Robert.
You know, I'm naturally interested in baseball. My brother was quite a ball player. He played in the Coast League up the ocean here a ways. More of an off-the-coast league at Alcatraz. He was quite a pitcher. He had plenty on the ball, but the chain held him back.
The Pepsodent Show was moving to the top of the ratings, and Bob's movie career was set with a 3-picture deal at Paramount. Bob was asked by the studio to be a presenter at the Academy Awards ceremonies held at the Biltmore Hotel. This was the beginning of a long association between Hope and the Academy.
I think that Bob was really excited about doing the Academy Awards. I think he realized that it was probably one of the more important shows that he did all year long. And the other thing about Bob is that Bob himself is a fan.
Despite extraordinary success, there was one thing missing from the Hope's lives. Dolores and Bob wanted children. Encouraged by close friends George Burns and Gracie Allen, who had just adopted their second baby, the Hopes eagerly registered with an adoption agency, The Cradle. Told that the process takes time, they went ahead with their plans to visit Bob's family in England. The clouds of war hung over the continent as the Hopes embarked on their first European vacation and belated honeymoon. In 1939, Bob and Dolores Hope were forced to cut their first European visit short due to the imminent threat of war. The U.S. Embassy urged all Americans to return home at once. On August 30th, the Hopes boarded a jam-packed Queen Mary for what would be her last civilian crossing. Under the threat of German submarine attack, the ship was forced to cross the Atlantic without lights or radio contact. The mood aboard the ship was so heavy that the captain asked Bob if he would do a show to help relieve the tensions among the passengers. Bob was apprehensive, but encouraged by fellow passenger and studio head Harry Warner, he faced a room of distressed and worried faces. He went on and performed a parody of Thanks for the Memory. They loved his special lyrics, and for that evening, there was laughter. Copies of the lyrics were given out to the passengers when they finally arrived in New York. When they returned, they learned that the Queen Mary's sister ship, the Athenia, had been sunk. They soon realized just how lucky they were. Back in California, the Hopes received a telegram with news that they could go to the adoption agency to pick up their baby girl. They named her Linda Teresa. They proudly showed off their newest addition to friends and family. In order to accommodate what they hoped would be a growing family, Bob and Dolores built their dream house on a few acres of walnut groves in the San Fernando Valley. Bob's radio career continued to flourish.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Bob Hope of the Bengal Lancers, promising you that even if you keep your mouth closed, Pepsodent's Gunga Din.
The threat of war had not yet become a reality for most Americans. Bob and his writers were so involved in the ratings game, to them, the enemy was Jack Benny, who was then #1 in radio, where they wanted to be. Bob worked in several mediums at the same time, cleverly using radio to promote his films. The Cat and the Canary with Paulette Goddard opened to critical acclaim. It was the first time that Bob was given the opportunity to wisecrack in a seemingly spontaneous and ad-lib manner.
Is here. Mr. Campbell at the head of the stairs, lawyer of Crosby. What happened?
Oh, they do that when you don't pay your bill. Are you all right?
Yes, of course, but...
Yeah, well, how am I?
Well,
oh, I'm all right. I always shake this way, don't...
It also allowed Hope the chance to meet his childhood idol, Charlie Chaplin, who was married to Paulette Goddard at the time. Chaplin had been watching dailies and complimented Bob on his work. In the summer of 1939, Hope and Crosby resurrected some of their old vaudeville routines for a benefit performance in Del Mar. The magic between them did not go unnoticed. Some executives from Paramount happened to be there and thought they were funny and fresh. Paramount decided to team them together in Road to Singapore, a picture originally written for but ultimately turned down by Burns and Allen. Their co-star was the beautiful Dorothy Lamour. The rest is history.
We'd go on the set and the director would say, okay, when do I say cut?
Now you go with that.
Yeah, I know. Wait just a second. Wait.
Time now.
Here, take it easy. Josh, I'm going with them.
Oh, you're going with them?
Yes, I'm going with them.
Will you be gone long?
Oh, I'll check back from time to time.
Oh, capital. Good. I'll take over while you're gone.
Yes, do.
But don't forget. Patty cake, baker's man. Bake a cake as fast as you...
They heard that we were ad-libbing on the set. And Don Hartman was a feisty little guy, a wonderful writer, but a feisty little guy, walked on the set. I said, hey, Don, if you hear one of your lines, yell bingo.
As Bob's career expanded, so did his family. In 1940, their second child, a boy, Tony, joined the family, giving Linda someone to boss around. Bob, meanwhile, learned another showbiz trick, how to juggle family and career. 1941 marked a change in America's attitude toward the war in Europe. Factories were being converted to help supply the Allied forces with planes and war materials, and thousands of men were enlisting, while hundreds of thousands more were being drafted. May 6, 1941, an important date in Bob's life. One of Hope's writers had a brother stationed at March Field, so he asked Bob if he would do his weekly radio show from there. Bob was reluctant to leave the comforts of his NBC studio and had to be talked into it.
Well, I just finished working on a picture just the other day. Yesterday, in fact, we finished. finished doing a picture called Road to Morocco with Dorothy Lamour and Bing Crosby. You know Lamour, the girl who started on the shoestring, now she wears it for a costume.
Bob soon realized how important his gift of laughter was and how powerful its effects could be. He had found his ideal audience, but he didn't take their willingness to laugh for granted. He worked hard to ensure the success of his monologues by incorporating the names of local watering holes and popular officers.
Horace had prepared a little
How about
number.
Colonel Robertson's birthday?
We
Thrilled to be here. Did we cut that in?
We did that earlier.
Colonel Robertson's
Remember,
birthday. No,
he
got it
grabbed a
now.
quick kiss from
Oh,
Hedda
yes,
Hopper.
that's right. He got it. That's right, he did. Is that why you were born, Colonel? I've been trying to knock that off for years.
Don't get ahead of me, you guys.
1941 ended with Hope doing another film, fittingly titled Caught in the Draft. It was extremely popular and timely.
Sergeant. Yeah? I'm afraid this won't do. You see, I'd like a little more drape and a little less droop.
Well, why didn't you say so? We'll be only too happy to make it over for
Well,
you.
that'll help.
Yeah. What about the trousers?
Well, they're a little snug under the arms. And what's in this snood back here, you hootie? Hey, what about me?
You'll have to wait till the next load. We're all out of uniform.
There's room for one more in here.
Are your shoes okay?
Oh, they're fine. He went that way.
Although Europe was at war, most Americans believed that President Roosevelt would keep the United States out of it. But that was soon to change. On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. That Tuesday night, President Roosevelt addressed the American people, preempting Bob's radio show.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Like most of the country, Hollywood was patriotic. Many top stars signed on to help the war effort. Bob wanted to enlist like fellow actors Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable, but Roosevelt insisted that he continue doing what he did best.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Bob's 7th War Loan Hope, telling you to buy those bonds, get that load off your hips, and when the war is over, your pocketbook will be in the chips.
1942 was an exhausting year even for the energetic Bob Hope. He took part in an exhibition golf tour with Bing Crosby for the Red Cross war relief effort. During this tense time, American moviegoers escaped with Crosby, Hope, and Lamour on the road to Morocco.
Hey, look.
The film was a box office smash.
We're off on the road to Morocco. Look out! Well, clear the way,
yes.
Here we come.
For any villains we may meet, we haven't any fear.
Paramount will protect us 'cause we're signed for 5 more years.
I think the road pictures really were kind of a breakthrough for their time. Bob and Bing seemed to be having fun. They seemed to be having a good time, but then they let the audience in on the good time. Talking to the audience, which they would, winking at the audience, which they did figuratively throughout the films, in a way that I don't think any comedies had done before, or certainly not as much or consistently.
Man, open your big mouth, ruin the only good scene I got in the picture.
Off the set, the realities of a country at war could not be ignored. Bob and 21 other stars joined the Hollywood Victory Caravan. They toured the country by train, doing shows to raise money for the Army-Navy Relief Fund.
And here's the start of the drive. Boarding a special train for Washington, they'll tour 300 cities from coast to coast. Go to any city that agrees to subscribe at least $1 million.
While performing in Washington, Bob and the troupe were invited to the White House.
And we had so much fun that Crosby called me after 3 or 4 days and he said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "We're having a ball." He said, "I'm joining you in Chicago."
Hope felt he could do more for the war effort, so he decided to bring his show to the troops. Radio show regulars Jerry Colonna and Francis Langford, with dancer Patty Thomas and one-man band Tony Romano, embarked on the first overseas USO tour. Hope and his band of gypsies went to where the troops were. They entertained soldiers all over Alaska, Europe, and North Africa, where they met General Eisenhower.
Last night the clerk came up and blew through the keyhole. But I want you to...
The following year, Hope's group toured the South Pacific.
We have a nice show here with Francis Langford, Jerry Colonna, Tony Romano, Patty Thomas, and Barney Dean. I know you'll enjoy the girls. You remember girls? Simply because you're near me. I just want you boys to see what you're fighting for, that's all.
They performed in dangerous and at times seemingly impossible conditions.
I just arrived from the States. You know the States, that's where Churchill lives.
They sang, danced, and made the soldiers laugh.
Careful, careful. Huh? Snipers.
Amidst bombing raids and strafing attacks. But the most emotionally challenging aspect of the tour came in the quietest of places. A war correspondent, John Steinbeck, who was with them at the time, filed this dispatch. July 23rd. Probably the most difficult, the most tearing thing of all is to be funny in a hospital room. The time hangs very long, and Bob Hope and his company must come into this quiet, inward, lonesome place and gently pull the minds outward, catch the interest, and finally bring laughter up out of the black water. Francis Langford remembers.
It was a burn unit and it was very bad. And Bob he walked in and walked up to this bed and, you know, trying to make this fella smile, and he told him a couple of little things, and nothing seemed to be happening, and I could feel it. It was getting the best of Bob. So Bob turned to me and he said, "Well, I think this fellow would like to hear you sing." And Bob walked out, and I thought, well, this is a fine thing. Leave me here to sing to this fella. And I did, and it wasn't easy.
She got through 8 bars, and the boy began to cry. She stopped, then went on, but her voice wouldn't work anymore, and she finished the song whispering. Nothing could have prepared Bob for what he experienced during World War II. His emotions took over with the news of D-Day. It inspired him to abandon his pre-written radio program and speak directly from his heart.
What's happened during these last few hours, not one of us will ever forget. How could you forget? You sat up all night by the radio and heard the bulletins, the flashes, the voices coming across from England, the commentators, the pilots returning from their greatest of all missions, newsboys yelling in the street, and it seemed that one world was ending and a new world beginning. You sat there and dawn began to sneak in, and you thought of the hundreds of thousands of kids you'd seen in camps the past 2 or 3 years. And now you could see all of them again in 4,000 ships on the English Channel, tumbling out of thousands of planes over Normandy and the occupied coast. God bless those kids across the English Channel. We saw all our boys really doing a sensational job over there. And I mean one of the greatest jobs, fighting for one of the greatest things that we know of. And that's our country, and you can very well be proud of this great country because we have seen the rest of it, ladies and gentlemen. And they're over there doing, well, the job of their lives.
Looking into the face of war forever changed Bob. He knew the horror of it could never really be washed away by laughter.
I've seen some great acts of achievement in the past few years. I saw a boy in a hospital in Espirito Santos lying in a bed, taking on a quart of blood plasma. This skinny American hero looked up, smiled, said, "That feels good." 2 hours later, they told us that boy died. And there's Salerno and Saipan in North Africa and Guadalcanal, on aircraft carriers that went down dragging Jap battleships and destroyers and Nazi subs and planes along with them. Little jungle clearings and road crossings and creeks and rivers without names. The achievement of capturing those places took more than perseverance and intelligence. It took blood and missing limbs and blinded eyes and shattered nerves and ruined lives. I'd like to thank every kid in uniform for the honor of working for him.
In 1946, World War II had ended. Bob returned home to Hollywood. By this point, his screen persona was well established.
That was that brash, go-getting, would-be man about town. A self-styled ladies' man, whether he really was or not. Who always seemed to be on top of the situation and had great confidence when in fact he was a coward and in fact was not very smart. And that was the joke.
Monsieur Beaucaire was his next project, a swashbuckler, considered to be one of his finest films.
Are you quite through, gentlemen? For if you are, Beaucaire, what is the matter with you tonight?
Sorry. Sorry. It's Mimi.
Mimi? Who's Mimi?
Oh, your girl. I mean my girl. That is, she's our girl. Gets around, doesn't she?
Hope often hired his radio writers to punch up his film scripts. They'd drop off their jokes at his house the night before filming.
And we'd rush up to the fence and we'd yell and ring the bell and try and get Bob to come. But it was very dangerous work because he had the biggest, meanest dog in that lot. And I don't know if Bob ever got anything we sent over the fence or whether the dog ate it.
While working at Paramount, Hope had the opportunity to spend more time with his family.
He would tell us stories, tell us what he was going to be doing. He would let us cue him with his lines. And I remember, too, when he would leave to go to the studio, he would do a little soft shoe out of the window and sort of shuffle off to Paramount.
In late summer of 1946, Dolores and Bob welcomed two more little Hopes, daughter Nora and son Kelly. They bought a larger home in Palm Springs, enjoying weekends of golf and relaxation. In October 1946, Hope's hero, General Eisenhower, presented him with the nation's highest civilian honor, the Medal of Merit for his wartime entertaining. Toward the end of the 40s, the popularity of radio began to fade as the American family's source of entertainment. The invention known as television began catching on. Hope and several other stars did the inaugural show of Paramount's television station.
This is KTLA Television, Los Angeles.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is Bob, first commercial television broadcast Hope, telling you gals who've tuned in, and I want to make this emphatic, if my face isn't handsome and debonair, please blame it on the static. Which one do I look at?
In the spring of 1948, Hope began Paleface with Jane Russell as his sexy co-star.
He started looking around and he says, well, how long is this going to take? He says, you guys have quite a lighting job here. He says, don't you? He says, well, I think I can get 9 holes in before the sun goes down, so I'll see you later. And he just took off and walked all the way across this enormous stage, went through the door, and we're all just standing there with looking, and the director just went, Bob, you come back here. We all burst out laughing and went home.
Buttons and Bows, the song from Paleface, went on to win an Oscar the following year.
Don't bury me in this prairie, take me where the cement grows. Let's move down to some big town where they love a gal by the cut of her clothes, and you'll stand out in buttons and bows. I considered a grand privilege to be here for the command performance, and Churchill heard that I was coming, and he's trying to blame it on the Labor Party.
Bob and Dolores were in England for the command performance and the royal wedding of Princess Elizabeth to Philip Mountbatten. Hope brought the royal couple an autograph album of Hollywood stars and traded quips with King George. In 1948, Bob and Dolores agreed to entertain the troops of the Berlin airlift at the request of Stuart Symington, Secretary of the Air Force. The trip was a success, but more significantly, it represented the start of a long-standing Hope tradition of bringing Christmas cheer to the United States military.
There are so many wonderful things that happened on that occasion, but that really will never be forgotten because it was Bob's first Christmas show.
travel never seemed to tire Bob. His physical stamina was legendary. Once exhausted after a 14-hour day on the set, Bob got a call to fill in at a benefit.
So he made a deal with Paramount, and they sent a plane for him, and he got on a plane and flew to Phoenix, did the show, finished about midnight, flew back to Los Angeles after some receptions and things. And as I was getting up about 6:30 and coming downstairs, he was walking in with no sleep. He was whistling, smiling, and walking in his normal, strong stride.
I'd say to him, I'm not feeling well, and I've got to. He said, go hit some golf balls. That was his idea. He never gave in to any kind of ill feeling or ill health or anything like that.
Hit it. Faster, boy.
It took an accident on the set of Fancy Pants, co-starring Lucille Ball, to finally bring him down.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
This mechanical horse that they were working with, he rolled over and he fell.
Bob suffered a mild concussion, but was soon back at work.
I wasn't afraid she'd bite me. It's the part I sit on that I'm worried about. But here goes.
This is NBC, the National Broadcasting Company.
The first Bob Hope television special aired live from New York on Easter Sunday, 1950.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Television. Well, they finally got me. I want to tell you it's a great... Which camera's working? I do hope you enjoyed the show, ladies and gentlemen. I want to tell you the last time I was in New York, I was at the Paramount Theater with Jane Russell, and here I am working for Frigidaire. A fella can get pneumonia this way.
In addition to his work as a performer, Bob was gaining a reputation for his savvy business decisions, especially in real estate.
He was a master when it came to business. He was sharp. And a lot of guys bet their match when they ran into him on any kind of business.
Gentlemen, we face a serious situation. We hope we face it.
In 1950, President Truman was busy with negotiations of global proportions. North Korea had invaded the South. Truman sent American forces as part of the United Nations effort to drive the North Koreans back to their own territory. Bob followed with his troop. Hope's efforts to entertain the troops did not stop with his shows.
Cologne and I, we'd walk into a hospital ward and we'd yell, all right, everybody up. Everybody up. And he'd start singing, I love life and I want to live. Da-da-da. And I'd grab a nurse and throw her in bed. They can't imagine that anybody would make noise in a hospital ward.
Back home at Paramount, Hope made The Seven Little Foys, the story of Eddie Foy, a fellow vaudevillian. The picture had an emotional and personal connection with Hope's vaudeville past. Bob went to James Cagney, a former vaudevillian himself, and asked him to play the part of George M. Cohen. Cagney agreed, and both men spent weeks perfecting the climactic dance number.
Any really good comedian has what it takes to be a good actor because he understands the fundamentals of human nature, or else he wouldn't be a good comedian.
I guess I'd be a lot better off. I laid a pretty big egg in this fatherhood racket. I only tried it because I knew their mother would want me to. I owed her that much. Judge, I don't know anything but show business. I've been on the stage all my life. I didn't think there was anything wrong in wanting my kids up there with me. This is all I know. I'm a song and dance man.
At Christmas time, Bob was in Iceland filming a television special when another accident occurred. he suffered a second, more severe concussion that caused some cerebral hemorrhaging.
That was the start of his eye problems. And so that fall really was a very serious one.
Through the years, ever since Roosevelt, Hope had entertained the presidents at the White House. It was a tradition that the presidents themselves looked forward to. But Hope's September 11, 1962 visit to the White House was special. President Kennedy presented Bob with the Congressional Gold Medal.
Mr. McClellan, presented to you on behalf of the people of the United States. Thank you very much, Mr. President. That's very nice. I suggested to Senator Symington that I should have had a nose job.
No one could have foreseen what fate had in store for the country. November 22nd, 1963. A stunned country witnessed the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and mourned his passing. Bob, like most Americans, was in shock, but life had to go on. Hope told his friend President Eisenhower that he was building a desert hospital and wanted to name it the Eisenhower Medical Center. The 60s were busy and happy years for the Hope family. First, their attorney son Tony was married in Ohio, and a year later, Bob walked his beautiful daughter Linda down the aisle. Aside from his family, golf was Bob's passion. He found time for it on an almost daily basis. Golf was a game that challenged him and also provided a much-needed release from his demanding schedule. He was a good golfer, a 4 handicap, and he enjoyed a side bet now and then.
And I walked to the first tee, and there was Bob, and there was Bing, and Bob said to me, "Well, Hennessy, what do you play for?" "Well, whatever the action is, I'm game." And he looked at me and he said, "Do you own your car?"
The Palm Springs Classic Golf Tournament was renamed the Bob Hope Desert Classic. Bob was elected its president, and it quickly became the social event in Palm Springs. Bob's schedule of personal appearances and television shows, including hosting the weekly Chrysler Theater, took its toll. Dolores took Bob to New York for another delicate eye surgery after several bouts of dizziness and impaired vision, the result of his old head injuries. Hope was warned to ease up because this was the final operation.
He did drive himself to a point where he did have some eye trouble.
And the doctor said, "Mr. Hope, you're exhausted. You should go home." And he said, "You're out of your mind."
His recovery was speeded by an invitation to attend the USO's silver anniversary in Washington, where he was to be presented the USO's highest award. President Johnson surprised Hope by turning up unexpectedly.
No, it's nice to be back here in Birdland, and I just want to say, I have to do it, sir. It's on the paper.
The Army honored Bob at West Point with the prestigious Sylvanus Thayer Award, normally given to military heroes and presidents. The Hope family was expanding. Bob and Dolores welcomed their first grandchild, Zachary, Tony's son, on Valentine's Day. A year later, Linda's son, Andrew, was born. And their first granddaughter, Miranda Hope, came along the following year. In 1964, Hope took his troupe on the road, as he had for so many Christmases, but this time he made his first of 9 trips to Vietnam.
My father was always walking up and down, rehearsing, working with the singers and dancers on routines because they'd never had a chance to rehearse before they left Los Angeles. A sense of camaraderie developed simply because everybody was mad at the food and throwing it at each other.
And the band came up with a brand new game. Coming over, they threw their box lunches overboard and watched the sharks get sick.
Hope shows contained the familiar mix of topical monologues, beautiful girls, audience participation, surprise guests, music, song and dance that he perfected during his World War II shows.
Thank you, tourists. All right, let's bring back the girls. Hey! Give me a little kiss right there, darling. Write your fiancée and tell her you still remember what you're fighting for. Thank you very much.
At every place we played, there were 20,000 soldiers sitting on the ground, just eating up every word. These guys have been waiting for hours, you know.
Oh, but it looks so pretty from the air.
Well, the boys in the camouflage department can work miracles.
I'll see you later, Bob.
Now, wait. Where are you going?
to the camouflage department. If they can make this place look beautiful, think what they can do for me.
Their reaction to the shows was electric, and it gave you energy. And the energy just surged through you, which you really needed because you were exhausted after the third day.
Bob watched the war grow from his first trip, where he entertained our military advisors stationed there, to the late 60s, when over 500,000 soldiers were positioned throughout Vietnam. Hope and his band of gypsies entertained bedraggled men in small platoons stationed deep in the jungle, and soldiers packed into huge bases. The military weren't the only ones under fire. Bob and his troop were often targeted by the Viet Cong.
What the hell is all that firing over there, will you? General, will you call off this stuff, this war, while we're on, please?
As we got to the Brinks Hotel, we looked over and there was some smoke coming. The Cong had bombed the hotel, thinking that we were in it, because they had a whole thing in the paper. The Cong is out to get the Bob Hope show. The bombing of the Brinks Hotel missed the Bob Hope show by 10 minutes due to a faulty timing device.
And I want to thank General Westmoreland for that wonderful welcome yesterday. We opened with a bang, I want to tell you.
So from then on, they wouldn't let us stay in Saigon. We had to go to Bangkok and fly in every day to the shows.
Bob couldn't do the shows alone. Each year, members of the production staff, crew, and band members kissed their loved ones goodbye and flew off with Bob to where the boys were. These rigorous and dangerous trips took their toll on various members of Hope's troop.
I had 5 children, and I had realized that I had never spent Christmas with them. When I talked to Bob about it, he said, I agree with what you're doing. He said, because I've never had the opportunity to spend Christmas with my kids. It's too late for me to catch it now.
We began to realize that our father simply could not be home for Christmas.
Bob would come out there and he would scream for him and holler for him, and every joke that he did was tailored to those guys at that base. They lived for that.
And the guys love it here because Da Nang has such a wonderful location. It's so handy to downtown Hanoi. I love the runway you have here. Great golfing country. Even the runway has 18 holes. I think
his need, his sympathy for those men was just outstanding. And they knew it. The troops understand brave. And they understood hope. That's why he was one of theirs.
In 1968, the Tet Offensive was mounted. After that, Lyndon Johnson announced that he would not seek another term and called for a unilateral cessation of bombing. On May 13th, the Paris peace talks began. From the beginning, this strange war elicited feelings never before voiced. People questioned the military's involvement in Vietnam. They took sides and gave voice to their opinions.
Man, I bring you great news from the land of liberty. It's still there. You may have to cross a picket line to see it, but it's there. But don't worry about those riots you hear about in the States. You'll be sent to survival school before they send you back there. Now, I have real good news for you. I want to tell you guys the country's behind you 50%.
On the home front, the ideological war continued, but Hope remained constant in his support of our fighting men and women.
And I was there for the 6th time this last Christmas, and I saw it with my own eyes. We're winning.
The New York Times asked Hope if he was a hawk or a dove. For the first time, Bob took sides on a political issue and took heat for his beliefs.
And when you say I was a hawk, I wanted to win. Just like every kid that I entertained over there, they wanted to win and get home.
We didn't really do political, you know? We didn't debate the war. The war was on. People were being killed. That wasn't our job there.
I wouldn't have been able to look in the mirror, you know? I had to go for those kids.
I feel like a cut-rate postman. Just before we got on the plane, his wife brought this over to us, and here's a picture of twins. First time he's ever seen them. Those. Go ahead, write a letter to Mother. Tell her how you're enjoying yourself and the show and the gals and the whole thing.
The girls are great, but...
A parent would write in and say, the last time I saw my son, so I shot a picture of him on your show, and he has been killed since then. And is there any way of getting the pictures? And we would try our darndest to go through all the pictures and find them.
A poignant moment at each of the shows came when everyone sang Silent Night at the end of the program.
Silent night, holy night.
But some of the kids couldn't make it to the show, so the show went to them.
One of the stops was always the hospital because the people were very cheered by seeing Hope walk around and greet the people.
It was good to see you.
I suddenly looked over and I said, "Bob, you've got blood on your shirt." And he wasn't even aware of it. He had just gotten so close to these guys. And
Hope had blood on his cuffs in the hospital. That was pretty sobering.
I was protected. I had a camera in front of me. I had that to hide behind emotionally. He had nothing. He was just out there with these kids who were so destroyed, so chopped up. They had so little chance to live, and he could do that and walk out of there and still be whole. I've known a lot of heroes in the Army, outside the Army, in life. He is the bravest man I ever met.
On May 9th, 1974, President Richard Nixon was forced to resign, and Vice President Gerald Ford was sworn in as the 38th President of the United States. The end of the Nixon presidency was a difficult time for Hope. He respected and enjoyed Nixon and considered him to be a friend.
The one thing that really touched my father after he left office, Bob said, he's my friend and he never left me down, and that meant so much to my dad. That's just the kind of person Bob Hope is. When he's your friend for life.
Bob Hope on television.
On October 24th, 1975, Bob's first special under his new long-term deal with NBC and Texaco aired. It featured 2 hours of clips from 25 years of television specials with 97 stars. And Bing Crosby, John Wayne, Frank Sinatra live in the studio. The show was a virtual who's who of entertainment.
As successful as Bob Hope was and is, he was a guy who still listened to others, and he was still collaborative at a time in his career when he didn't really need to be.
During the summer of '76, Bob Hope was named a Commander of the British Empire, an honor approved by Queen Elizabeth. The honor was conferred with great ceremony at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. President Gerald Ford asked Bob to entertain at the White House Gala, honoring Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, and commemorating the bicentennial year. The Queen had especially requested Bob's presence.
Welcome. And I just want to say that not one of your colonies now, you're treating some of the stuff that you're through with that you've sent us, like the Queen Mary and the London Bridge. It's not like you lost a colony, it's like you found an attic.
Bob was in New York for a scheduled benefit when he received some shocking news. His longtime friend and colleague, Bing Crosby, had died suddenly on the golf course in Spain.
Bob was devastated. He had a double whammy because the day before my precious mother had died. It was the only time I know that Bob failed to appear for something that he said he would do. He couldn't do it. It was a great shock to Bob. He loved Bing very much.
Bob was asked by the Motion Picture Academy to be the single host of their 50th anniversary Oscar presentations. He happily performed this task, marking his 23rd appearance on the show. Over the years, the Academy paid tribute to Bob 5 times, including 2 honorary Oscars and the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award.
Bob Hope remains, in my mind, and in most people's mind, the best masters of ceremonies of the Academy has ever had.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, here we are once again. Welcome to the Academy Awards, or as it's known at my house, Passover.
Our few months later, Hope's 75th birthday was celebrated with a huge star-studded gala at the Kennedy Center in Washington. President and Mrs. Carter hosted the two-day event, which included a White House reception in the East Room for 500 VIP guests.
I've been in office now for 489 days, and when I spend 3 more weeks, I will have stayed as many nights in the White House as Bob Hope has.
In Washington, D.C., Congress decided to pay a tribute to Bob Hope, a glorious tribute. He was there. He was up in the gallery with his family, and Congress sang to him at the floor. A glorious tribute.
In 1979, Bob Hope was given permission by the newly opened Chinese government to do the first variety entertainment special from the People's Republic of China.
Hey, we're off on the road to China.
We were the first entertainment or variety type program that was allowed into China. It was fascinating trying to put together a show in a country like that where language was a huge barrier, where the frame of reference was so dramatically different from ours. For example, I remember part of my job was I would try to explain to them the jokes. It was very, very difficult. I mean, almost anything that you talk about, they didn't understand. It was not something that was part of their lives. And then they'd say, that's not funny. And I'd say, well, to the American people, it's funny. Oh.
The 3-hour special from China was very well received, and another first for Hope. At 76, he enjoyed himself thoroughly. Though Hope loved to travel, the doctors advised him to slow down because of continuing concerns for his eyesight. This allowed him to spend more time with his family. But it still seemed that his life was a constant round of benefit dinners, personal appearances, and of course, golf. In the mid and late 80s, President Reagan dispatched U.S. military to the Middle East to protect American interests. To help ease tensions, Reagan called on his friend Bob Hope to travel to the Persian Gulf.
We'd get to a ship, and they'd helicopter us in. The guys just were so appreciative. They were so happy to see him.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are on the hangar deck of the USS Guam. And may I tell you, it's been a while since I've entertained servicemen, but Washington told me, if we can bring ships out of mothballs, why not you?
After so many goodwill trips, Bob Hope had become more than just an entertainer. He'd become a legend and a symbol of America itself.
I felt I was very lucky. I felt like I was a part of history.
Bob and the rest of the world hoped and prayed for peace in the Middle East. But the area continued to be a tinderbox, ready to ignite at any time. May 1990. Communism had loosened its grip on Eastern Europe. Bob, Dolores, and their USO troop were off to do a television special at the Berlin Wall and Moscow.
I stopped someone on the street to ask for directions, but his accent was so thick I couldn't understand him. He was from Texas.
When Bob returned to Washington, President Reagan presented him with the Kennedy Center honors. The following year, George Burns and Bob Hope decided to do a new vaudeville act. A sold-out crowd at Madison Square Garden enjoyed the two troopers with over 150 years of laughter between them.
This family of yours, you all live together?
Yeah, that's my uncle, my father, my nephew, my cousin, and my brother. And, you know, we all sleep in the same bed.
I'm surprised your grandfather wasn't sleeping with him.
My grandfather did sleep in his bed, but he died, so they made him get up.
There's a lot of people who used to say to him, Bob, look, you got all the money in the world, all the money you need. Why don't you quit and enjoy yourself? He's old. He said, no, this is my lifeblood. He says, being able to entertain, being able to help people, doing these benefits, and I'll be telling jokes till the day I die, and then I'll have some jokes for the man upstairs.
On another trip to New York, Hope was honored by the Film Society of Lincoln Center. A longtime fan and former writer of Hope's, Woody Allen selected some of his favorite film clips in a personal tribute that inspired a reevaluation of Hope's movie career.
It's no secret that Bob Hope is the comic idol of my life, certainly the greatest influence on me.
You've got that charm, that subtle charm, that makes young farmers desert the farm, 'cause you've got that thing, that certain thing.
The picture is a two-reeler with music and lyrics by Cole Porter. It's called Paris, Paris. It stars, among others, a kind of good-looking, though also kind of silly-looking young song and dance man. You'd never guess it from looking at him here, but soon after he would turn into an actor with the single best comic delivery certainly that I've ever seen.
Well, here I am. Start bubbling.
Hello.
Are you alone?
I certainly am alone. Why do you ask?
Well, I thought you might have a date with Bean Belly.
Oh, no. What makes you think that?
Well, he's always looking for a place to keep warm.
You don't think I could get serious about him with a great, big, handsome hunk of man like you around, do you?
Just call me Hunk.
All right, Hunk.
I must remember what kind of soap I used this morning. Here, drop anchor here, baby, and we'll talk it over. Did I say talk?
His 60 comedy films established Bob Hope's place in cinema history.
Shall I kiss you now, or do you want me to tease you for a while?
Christmas time, 1990, was extremely tense. President Bush had drawn a line in the sand, and Saddam Hussein was testing his limits. Bob told the president he wanted to go to Saudi Arabia.
There was absolutely no holding him down. He was determined that he was going to go.
Stealth bomber, that's a big deal. Flies in undetected bombs and flies away. Hell, I've been doing that all my life. That program cost $70 billion, and I got a great idea. If those planes are invisible, let's not build any, but tell the Iraqis they're up there, huh?
To see Dad out there in this heat and out in the sand, out in the helicopters and on the back of the Hummers, and it was amazing. It was hard to believe that he was 87 years old. And my mother too, she went out into the middle of the desert.
We flew out and just nothing but desert. Sand and sand. I think I spotted a few camels. And we landed, and then they took us by truck to another place. We were only about 40 miles from Kuwait. These poor kids were coming in, just straggling in from all over the desert.
Come on, man. Look at them come. Hot damn. Isn't that great? You can hear that all right, can't you? This is really something out here. I got sand in places where I didn't even know I had places.
Merry Christmas. What are you doing here? Hello. I said, well, where are you all from? And they yelled up. There must have been about 400 of them there by that time. 29 palms. I said, you're kidding. Our house in Palm Springs is just a few miles. So I said, when you get back, you come and visit us.
All I want to say is you all look great, and stay that way. We love you, believe me, for what you're doing. Thank you very much.
The special bond that Bob had always shared with the armed forces was still there as he eased the pressures that they faced. He joined them for Christmas dinner and visited their home away from home.
How you doing? Merry Christmas to all of you.
Taylor, sir. Taylor, sir.
How are you?
By Easter of that year, the war in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait was over. The Marines of Operation Desert Storm, who the Hopes had entertained, were back and were invited with their families to enjoy a steak dinner and some first-class entertainment. A yellow ribbon party.
Hey, we found out something about military food over in Saudi Arabia. One guy told me it tastes better when you eat it with your gas mask on. Is that true?
Unlike Vietnam, the troops from this war in the Middle East were honored with parades and celebrations. The American people, including the stars, were eager to show their appreciation. Bob was happy to see that this war and homecoming allowed the country to finally acknowledge the contributions of the Vietnam vets as they paraded side by side with the troops of Desert Storm. In 1993, Bob Hope was 90 years old. To celebrate the occasion, NBC pulled out all the stops with a 3-hour special, a black-tie, star-studded affair that recounted his amazing life. As if NBC's party wasn't enough, Dolores threw her own party on his actual birthday, transforming their backyard into a circus, complete with tent and midway.
Happy birthday, Bob.
Presidents, stars, friends, all enjoyed themselves in the circus atmosphere Dolores had created. A year later in Washington, D.C., the Hope Chapel was dedicated at the National Shrine. Dolores supervised the design, and on Bob's 91st birthday, several cardinals and dozens of bishops and priests, along with a first-rate choir, dedicated the Chapel of Our Lady of Hope to Bob's mother, Avis.
We come to dedicate a new and splendid chapel.
So we were gathered in the shrine. It's a very small room, and there were several cardinals that were going around with their incense holders, and it started to get a little smoky in there. And my grandfather, at one point, just turned to my grandmother and said just a little too loudly, "We better get out of here before they burn the whole place down." And we spent the rest of the service trying not to burst out into laughter.
Bob and Dolores decided to record an album of their favorite Christmas songs, Hopes for the Holidays, so that their family, friends, and fans could hear their voices at Christmas time as they had for so many years. The Bob Hope Chrysler Classic continued to make millions for desert charities. One year, Bob called former Presidents Ford and Bush and President Clinton and asked if they would play in his tournament. They agreed, and Hope joined them in one of the all-time power foursomes.
To be honest, none of us played very well that day, and we hit so many people I had to declare the course a disaster area.
We kept hitting people. I wasn't the only one that decked somebody that day.
He says I'm the hit man for the PGA.
Even though his eyesight wasn't great, Hope managed to make a few spectacular shots, which wowed the gallery. On his birthday in 1995, the Navy bestowed on Bob an honor of immense proportion. A ship, the USNS Bob Hope, the second largest ship in the Navy. A short time later, the U.S. Air Force named one of their new C-17s, the Spirit of Bob Hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Spirit of Bob Hope.
I like the idea of having a plane named me. I wouldn't have been too cheap to have one of my own.
On November 23rd, 1996, after 60 years with NBC, Bob decided that Laughing with the Presidents would be his final special on that network. He declared himself a free agent. At 93, he was happy to take life a little easier. After all, he needed time to work on his golf game.
From Milton Berle to Sid Caesar to Jack Parr to Johnny Carson to all of those people who had done primetime specials over the years on NBC, Bob Hope was the end of an era of that kind of television, and I think that there will never be anyone like him.
At the end of October 1997, President Clinton signed a bill into law naming Bob Hope an honorary veteran. The first time in U.S. history that this has ever been done.
When you began your tours during World War II, we were all young, eager, ready to take on the fight, little realizing how much we would miss things at home. Well, you brought those things to us through your shows. You were the link to our families and to back home. How grateful we are to you and your family for your generosity, spirit, and time from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
You are now a veteran.
I want to thank everybody
At the Vietnam Wall, Bob said, "I've been given many awards in my lifetime, but to be numbered among the men and women I admire most is the greatest honor I have ever received."
I think he's a genuine patriot.
He is the consummate landmark comedian of our time.
Well, of course, he's a national treasure.
I see him as being a hero.
He's the comedy master of the universe.
There was no one, and there never will be, no one like Hope, because he had what we call class with a capital K.
I don't think there's anybody like that, or will be again.
I remember him as a song and dance man.
Greatest performers.
A fabulous humorist.
Was like a businessman.
Keeping all of us laughing, as well as the rest of the world, was his favorite thing to do.
He was tap dancing on the phone. He was always on the phone.
He's always singing a song, always doing a little shuffle.
He's always a hummer.
You know, he's very hard to imitate.
He says, "Hey, Milton, did you meet my grandson? This is Zachary. He's the guy I told you who runs up the hill in Palm Springs. Isn't that something?"
Anytime Bob Hope told you he would do something, he did it.
A tremendous loyalty to people that he'd worked with.
He was ready for anything.
He's a man of great stamina.
He could fall asleep anywhere.
I work hard. He even worked harder. I'll tell you why. Because he's older.
I think that Queen Elizabeth should knight him. I may write her a letter.
There'll never be another Bob Hope. So let's love him now when we can.
I think I've been blessed and very grateful that this was the man that I was going to live with for 64 years.
The boy from the London suburbs has had quite a life. He was born in 1903 as the age of electricity began, and the Wright brothers made their first flight. He'd only been in Cleveland 2 years when Henry Ford introduced the Model T in 1908. Bob was 12 years old in 1915 when the first transcontinental telephone call was made. When women got the vote, he was beginning his career in show business. He was a vaudeville headliner when Lindbergh flew non-stop to Paris. By the time the Empire State Building was built in 1931, Hope was on Broadway. Bob was a radio and film star in 1945 when the United States unleashed the power of the atom. His television career was taking off in the 50s when Jonas Salk discovered the cure for polio. And during the turbulent 60s, as Martin Luther King was fighting for civil rights, Hope was entertaining American troops in Vietnam. Bob has been part of the history of the United States in a way few men have. He's seen America through the heartache of war and celebrated her achievements in space.
I've heard of off-Broadway, but this is ridiculous.
He's been friends with our men on the moon and world leaders. When Bob was asked what he'd do if he had his life to live over, he quipped, "I wouldn't have time." Bob Hope has had an incredible career in which he has touched so many lives with laughter, has known so many people, has received so many honors and awards. At the end of a long career, he can look back with those he's entertained and say, "Thanks for the memory."